I love using the natural materials the way the old painters did. There's just something earthy and calming, I think, using an egg yolk as a binder, or having my kitchen smell like a barn if I'm heating up my hide glue. My name is Pieper Bloomquist. I'm a contemporary folk artist painting in the Scandinavian traditions of Norwegian rosemåling and Swedish Dalmålning and Bonadsmålning. I'm also a registered oncology nurse. I grew up in Regal, Minnesota, population 44, central Minnesota. There were 5 of us kids. I was the oldest of 5. We were all 2 years apart. I was always the tallest, and so all of our pictures, as family pictures, when it's the 4 or 5 of us kids, it's this line of little kids and then tall Pieper right there at the end. It's an interesting background, I think, growing up in a very small town. One thing that my parents taught me is that when you are living in a small group of people, you need to find something good in everybody, because that's your support system and that is your group, that's your tribe, that's your clan, and if something goes wrong, those are the people that you need to rely on, and we all rely on each other. My Scandinavian heritage comes from my mother's side. My grandpa was a chef. He made Swedish pancakes all the time for us on Saturday mornings after catechism. So we would run from the church up to my parents' restaurant, and they weren't on the menu, and so he would make pancakes just for us 5 kids. My first Swedish painting that I did, I chose Saturday morning pancakes. I always enjoyed art as a small child. I took all of the art classes in high school. I tried taking one art class in college. I hated it. I didn't like the atmosphere. I didn't like the professor, so I lasted 45 minutes and left. And then my mom one day just said, "Oh, we're so Swedish, you should learn how to rosemall." And my mom suggested that I call the Swedish Institute and see if they were teaching classes. And I did call the Swedish Institute, and I got a very curt answer that said, "We don't teach rosemalling here, that's a Norwegian art form," and I didn't know that at all. I didn't know anything about rosemalling. I didn't know anything about that world of Scandinavian folk art. So I guess I ended up in Dakota, Iowa, and I took a rosemalling class. As I walked through Vesterheim, I would see things here and there that were beautiful, and I would say, of everything in the room, that's the piece I like. And everyone kept saying, "Oh, that's Karen Jenson. Oh, that's Karen Jenson's. Oh, that's Karen Jenson's work. She doesn't teach here anymore." The following year, I got the course catalog, and she was teaching a rosemalling class, so I immediately went down and took it. And I had been coveting her work, and the freedom of it had been feeding my soul for a year. I wanted to know her, and I wanted to learn from her. I think her and I had similar personalities. I think we both are a little bit free-spirited, and I think a little contemplative about life. And I just felt a kinship with her, and it was her encouragement. She encouraged me to keep going, and she invited me to be an apprentice with her, which I gladly did. And just spending so much time one-on-one with her has been wonderful. Yeah. What did I learn from Karen? A lot. I learned a lot about life, actually. I think just sitting and painting, we've just talked about life and politics and social issues, and our perspectives on growing as women and the changes that we go through when we start coming into our own person. And I learned a lot about that from her. As far as the artwork that I learned from Karen, the biggest thing I took away from her was the freedom of her scroll work, to do the unexpected. And I remember asking her when we would do some scrolls, should I have flowers coming out from between the scrolls? And she said, I don't do that. That's too expected. I like to cross over. And that's just, those words are repeated in my head all the time. I've also learned some Hallingdal from Judith Chenstead, who is my other mentor and friend. And Judith and Karen are completely different people. Judith learned from Nils Ellingsgaard, and Karen learned from Sigmund Arseth. I consider those kinds of lines of rosemalling in the Norwegian rosemalling world, and I have been blessed to have these two fantastic mentors and people teach me. From Karen, I learned how to look at it as a design, like as a picture, how to balance it, how to balance color, how to balance opacity versus transparency, how to create fun, sometimes comical versions of life events. And from Judith, I learned the history. Judith is a little hardliner as far as learning how to do it historically. What were the traditional materials? What were the traditional methods that were used? So I got the best of both worlds with both of those women in my painting. Karen painted a lot of Swedish Dalmålning as well, and that was something that I didn't know anything about until our second class. We saw pictures of this Swedish Dalmålning and Bonadsmålning, and we looked at that and said, what is this? What is this stuff? What are these pictures of these strange medieval looking people? That spoke to me. Karen is also half Swedish, and so that's why I think she was attracted to Swedish as well. So there are two distinct styles of Swedish wall painting. They developed about the same time. They didn't really know of each other. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the economy had changed and people wanted to bring a little bit more color into their homes. There was a little bit of extra income, so somebody would be able to hire an artist to come and paint something that would maybe give them a little status, maybe a nice cupboard or a wall hanging. Dalmålning is the word we use to describe the wall paintings that were done in and around the province of Dalarna, Sweden, which is northern central Sweden. And that province is sort of the keeper of the Swedish traditions. That's where you see a lot of folk music, people still wearing their folkdräkt. That province that's where the Dalahast comes from. The Dalhast, which is the little Dala horse. The Mora clocks were made in Dalarna. The painters chose to permanently affix those paintings to the walls. Those paintings are very large, they're wall-sized, a little bit lighter feel, they're a little bit more open and airy, and there's the presence of this large telescoping flower that we call the Kurbits flower. And this painting style is sometimes called Kurbits or Kurbitsmålning. Bonadsmålning is the word that we use to describe the wall paintings from southern Sweden, and those were the temporary hangings. Very compact design, very dark, sort of this horror vacui, which is a fear of empty spaces that was common in medieval artwork. Both styles were inspired by the paintings that were done in churches that they saw, these medieval paintings. People wanted to bring that type of imagery into their own home. The very large Bonadsmålning that hangs on the wall of my house, I did during my apprenticeship with Karen Jenson. I think it was the second or third piece that I did in my apprenticeship with her. And when I showed her the picture of what I wanted to do, I said, well, I'm gonna need a canvas that's about 6 feet long. And she said, 6 feet long? It needs to be 6 feet tall and 18 feet long. This particular painting is an old Swedish motif. It's called Wise Men and 10 Virgins. It's a common motif that was done in the southern parts of Sweden because it's got both nativity and wedding themes to it. And those were two occasions that these paintings would be hung. One of the fantastic things that I love about Swedish folk art is when they painted their Bible stories, they dressed their characters in traditional Swedish dress of the day. The old painters painted characters and people the way they saw them at the time. So when I do my painting, I paint people in the way that I see them. So in my paintings, sometimes I will dress my characters in old Swedish dress of that time, but a lot of my current paintings, especially if I'm telling a modern story, I paint my characters using modern dress. So when I first started painting with Karen Jenson, I painted with acrylic paints because that's what she used. And I didn't know any different. And she used acrylics, so that's how I learned. For almost a decade, I painted just solely with acrylics on canvas. When we were painting Swedish, it was on canvas. When we did Norwegian rosemalling, it was on woodware, generally. When I started painting with Judith Chenstead, at the time Judith was using casein to do her Swedish painting, and she was exploring using fish glue as a binder with pigments. And I walked through her kitchen and I saw all of this stuff out in her kitchen. She was cooking the glue, and I just thought, oh, this is so hard. I have little kids at home, I'm frantic, I'm trying to go to work every day, and I just don't have time or energy for any of this. And she looked right at me and said, yeah, well, after the apocalypse, I'll still be painting and you won't. And I said, okay, huh. This is called a muller, and it's like a paperweight. It's very heavy, but there's a flat bottom to it. And with a lot of pigments, you don't necessarily need to do this, but in the old days, you absolutely did all the time. And now with some pigments, you have to. What the idea is you have a hard, flat surface. I'm going to put my powdered pigment on there, mix it with a little bit of water, and then I'm going to mull it or temper it. And what that means is I'm not actually grinding that pigment down. What it means is I'm evenly dispersing the pigment particles into the solution. So I'm making a perfectly spread out solution. When I went to Sweden, the bulk of what I was interested in learning was where these artists lived and what their environment was. I was interested in their trade routes. I was interested in the economic situation, where they sourced their materials. They used hide glue, chalk, powdered pigments. There were some painters that dug their pigments out of the earth themselves. A lot of them made their own brushes, and the linen, if they were painting on cloth, was often in the early days, was hand woven because they didn't have machine weaving by then. And I thought, I would love to be able to do the things the way the old painters did. This is raw linen, which I've washed and hung out. Then I've sized it with an animal glue, which I mix. It's like mixing a Jell-O. So it comes in granules and you mix it like a 1-to-8 solution and let it harden overnight, and then you melt it down to a certain temperature and you brush it on. So it's been sized, and then I've got 3 coats of gesso on it already, and I'm just waiting for this 4th coat right here. At one point, somebody asked me to teach a class, and I thought, I don't know how to teach. But what I did do is I was volunteer mom at the elementary school in the art class. I was somebody that never started small. So, Pieper, do you want to volunteer to work at the kids' art show? Sure. Do you want to do a hands-on mural with the kids? Sure. What does that mean? 3 days, we're going to create this giant mural. It's up to you, figure it out. And so everything I did had a little bit of a Scandinavian bent to it, but I decided kids were the way to go. Kids, and then I got invited to go into a nursing home and do art activities with residents of a nursing home. And that initially was kind of a disaster too, because I really overestimated what people were capable of doing. But the second time I did that, it was fantastic. It's not about the final product, it's about the process. It's let's just take an hour and a half, that's all anybody has energy for, and let's just play. Let's just play with paint. And the Swedish style is perfect for that, especially in elder care facilities, because it's storytelling. And what I realized is that when we're painting, we can talk about our own stories. And so all I have to do is say something like, here's a picture of a woman milking a cow. Did any of you ever milk cows when you were growing up? And I mean, that's fodder for conversation for an hour. The reason why I have a painting career today is because I take those traditional motifs and traditional processes and traditional materials and tell modern stories. What do Scandinavian folk arts mean to me? I think it's a connection to homeland. Foods that we eat, the celebrations that we celebrate, the way we decorate our homes. I think whatever our heritage is, we hold those things dear and we keep them close as sort of a reminder of where we came from.
Postcards is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Additional support provided by Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farms, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. On the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Alexandria, Minnesota, a year-round destination with hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for memorable vacations and events. More information at explorealex.com. The Lake Region Arts Council's Arts Calendar, an arts and cultural heritage funded digital calendar showcasing upcoming art events and opportunities for artists in West Central Minnesota. On the web at lrac4calendar.org. Playing today's new music plus your favorite hits, 96.7 Cram. Online at 967cram.com.